We've been talking about the beads.
Mhm.
Why don't we take a look at some?
Well, let's do that.
All right, we're looking at some beautiful beads and some and a wonderful butterfly that just flew in and landed on the table. Uh, and we're going to progress along here. And Alan, can you show us a little bit of the examples of the beads that the Chinese were making when you and Danny first got to the mine,
Uh,
and then how it progressed on into his beads and then on to the Voshall beads.
Absolutely, can do it. Okay, these beads are actually not that representative of uh, the most of the beads you'll find out there because these are done with hard stone. This strand my niece has had for almost 40 years. This is very hard stone. And as we were saying earlier, if you don't have the correct kind of tooling and access to diamond powders and bits and things like that, you're much more inclined to work with soft stone than hard stone. Hard stone just means because you don't get paid anymore for it, you don't sell the product. Um, it just makes sense that they would deal with softer stone. And but this is not that. These are hard
Yep.
stone here. I mean, this is
Now, how did your nieces end up getting this beautiful, valuable, hard turquoise beads?
um, my niece got married in I think 1987 maybe, and at one of my trips back into the States at some point, I remember my mother saying, "Your niece is getting married. You need to get her something blue. It's part of the wedding thing. Something borrowed, something new, something blue." So I was talking with the mine director in our usual evening conversations, or the cutting shop director, and I just told him I need to remember to get something blue for my niece. And then a few days later, he brought this strand back and gave me this strand for my niece, and she's had it all these years. Right now, it needs to be restrung. It's broken here off the clasp, but this is it's quite heavy stone.
I think one thing that's interesting to me is that when we think of Chinese turquoise and what our current appreciation for the highest grade of turquoise is the dark web.
That's right.
Now, but that has not historically been the case. And if we think in our country, there was a whole period of time where it was the sky blue that was the preferred color, the old Persian turquoise. And we certainly know that not at the time of communist China, but earlier than that, there had been extensive trade of turquoise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why it shows here that when he was picking what he thought would be the highest grade was the hard stone and the clear blue.
Absolutely, and this would be, I mean, this strand was meant for someone within the domestic world there in China. I couldn't say who or how long. For all I know, this thing was made 100 years ago. I have no idea. Uh, but but yes, they really at that time were more interested in the clear blues or primarily clear. But this is also one of their beads right here, and you can see that is all matrix. I mean, that's just beautiful stone. Uh,
Well, with a darker blue, that again in our market now with our eye, we tend to favor the darker blue
this
set in a black dark matrix.
Yeah, this is a cultural difference we're seeing here, and this is very much a Chinese strand. And again, before we got there, all the products they made had to be made without the use of power when because it was pretty unreliable and without tooling. So there was a lot of this. This also is a bead. It's called a bee, but this kind of product you can make by spinning them, by using treadmills and using your hands and grits and your fingers, just as they've done here on these. This one, I'd forgotten I even had this. It came as a ball. I just had it in one of my old suitcases, and I found it. And Danny Lepacki said, "Oh my God, you have to drill a hole in that, and Karen needs to wear it." So that's how it got to this point. But it was just a ball, undrilled ball. Before, that's how it came out of China.
So you were working closely with Danny. You met him when you brought the first turquoise in, which you just described for us. Then you continued to work closely with him. He went to China. You mentioned he helped set up the machine shop, the cutting shop there. But you also had an interesting encounter with him back in the US, and this butterfly played an important role in that. Could you tell us a little about that?
I can. Like I say, I met Danny the first time when we came in with that stone. He made that beautiful strand of beads, but that stone sold right away. And by then, we'd also decided that we could be making cabs in China, and the Chinese would like that because they would be the beneficiaries of the diamond tooling and other things that we would import to, and we could we could do a barter with. Uh, so Danny was going to come back over as um, let's say a consultant, for lack of a better phrase. But anyway, he was going to come over and he was going to help with establishing that shop because, again, there aren't stores. Not even in the big cities. You can't buy a lapidary. At that time, you couldn't buy a piece of lapidary equipment. If you wanted something, you had to build it. You had to make it. And that's what we did. And that's where Danny came into it initially. Where, we, you have to learn to work around the system in China at that time. But we were able to gain access to about 50 electric motors and some steel that we were able to shape into to make the lapidary equipment out of, and then put all this together in a shop and then train the workers for it. And so that's what Danny came for and what he was doing there. But of course, Danny loved turquoise. So he was going to jump into it with both feet and did. He did a great job of exploring all over China, other areas that there might have been turquoise, and there was turquoise, and importing that back into the U.S. But in the process also, he capitalized on the fact that there was no diamond tooling or lapidary equipment in China at all. And he began manufacturing his diamond tooling, saw blades, and etc. And I think a lot of people are very familiar with the way he started that business going. But anyway, so we worked together a lot, and we were always seeing one another either in Hong Kong or in China or in the U.S. when I came to visit. And in October or November of 1989, I came in the country and had these slabs amongst a bunch of other rock that I had that was being brought into some buyers. And at Danny's house, he and I were looking at all these slabs that we'd had cut up in the rough stone. And he took, as we had it spread out, much as it is here, he took his pencil and he pushed all these 4 pieces here into this configuration, just like that. And he looked at it and he looked at me and he said, "That would make a killer butterfly."
Well, that would make a killer butterfly.
Yeah, and he was right, because there is the killer butterfly. And this is an extra wing. It just was an extra bit of stone, as was this. But this is a really nice piece that he made for me, and I'm just really happy to still have it here almost 40 years later.
Well, that story is found on the blog, on the website. It's called A Butterfly's Migration, and anybody can read about that. And when I was developing the turquoise grading system, people were asking me, "Well, what's 100? What's a perfect stone?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. From the minute I give a perfect stone, something will come along that's better." So I hesitated giving anything a perfect stone, but I have assigned a TG grade of 100 for this turquoise.
And it's worth noting that if it's not obvious, and that there's two completely different kinds of turquoise in these stones. This very tight black matrix surrounded by the I guess red would be what we call red matrix. But there are very different kinds of stones, so it's unusual in the fact that I don't know what has to happen in nature for that to occur. But you don't see much of it. Very little, in fact. So keeping these as a set was really important to me. And if you take a photograph of this and you blow it up to look at it, the integrity of all this matrix is stunning. I guess I suppose that's a good way of putting it. Just how well it blows up, and you don't see flaws. It's not like you're looking from a distance. Looks great from here, but when you get it up with a 10 power loop on it, how does it look? It still looks great.
Quite amazing. And of course, we see not only was Danny a wonderful lapidary and bead maker, but you can see here what an accomplished jeweler he was in terms of making this wonderful butterfly with these little green Caracal Lake, I believe, eyes.
Yeah, I think these are northern lights.
Or northern lights. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, those bright green northern lights. But Danny did everything the hard way all the time. He really worked at all the shots that are set here and the bezel. He was a real perfectionist, and it fit well with the stone, and I was just happy to.
Well, there are 2 interviews with Danny that viewers can watch on the blog. So proceeding along there, we have some beads that Danny made, right?
Yeah, and after 1990, I went back to my normal occupation, which was oil and gas exploration. But in the process of that, I stayed in touch with Danny a couple times a year. But I had developed my passion for beads already, so I would have him make strands of beads periodically. And this was the first strand, also Chinese turquoise. You can see he's got his trademark clasp on it. But it's just a beautiful strand of beads. My wife's been wearing this for forever.
We were discussing earlier about the Chinese did not have a market for cabochons, and they had the beads. And now we were saying about the challenge for a bead maker using high-grade natural turquoise is because the rule of thumb is generally you get about 50% wastage cutting cabochons, but how does that translate into bead making?
Beads, it comes down almost usually to 80 or 85% wastage. And wastage is, I'm not sure it's the correct term. It's the cost of doing business. If you're going to have a strand of beads this uniform, that's fine.
Well, when we say wastage for the lapidary who's cutting it, it means mud.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And if you're making other forms of jewelry, if you think about every one of these beads is a cabochon, and it would make more financial sense for someone to turn all these separate cabochons into separate pieces of jewelry or use them otherwise than this. Let me put it that way. So most people, if they're buying this amount of stone, they're going to be wanting to make sure that it pays for itself. And I'm a hobbyist, so I view things a little bit differently. And as a collector, the fact that there's 80% wastage in here, it doesn't particularly bother me. I'm sorry to see some of the stone didn't make it through this process because it's beautiful, but really, that's why you don't see a whole bunch of handmade individually. And by handmade, I mean each and every bead is made individually by hand. There is nothing done in mass. There is no tumbling. There is no wires. Every one is done separately.
Well, there's very few uh, like you, especially who are in the trade. You mentioned you met Peaky Wadsworth. She's one who
Yep.
continues to work in natural stone. But
Very nice job.
you have to have buyers that will be willing to appreciate the difference between these beads and a mass-produced from either imitation turquoise or treated turquoise. So you learned how, you decided, Danny, teach me how to make beads. And boy, you had a good teacher and a very good student, because my goodness, Allan, this beads you're making are exceptional.
Well, when I was still in my working career, I didn't have time to be setting up shops and having hobbies. I mean, life was busy enough, so my hobby had to be in the collection of them. But after I had retired, I'd go see Danny, and he'd always tell me, "You need to start making beads." And I'd play with him in his shop a little bit, made a couple. But it really was him. I don't want to say pushing me, just reminding me, this is not some magic that you can't do. You can do this too. You just have to want to do it. You have to enjoy doing it. And again, since it's a hobby, I can take as much time as I want.
Well, you have the skill sets, as a drilling engineer. You learned there could be a very high cost for not being very precise, as in having a well blow up. So that precision and that attention to detail, I think, has served you well as a bead maker.
Well, it has. It has. You're absolutely correct. Having Danny as my teacher was really.
Well, Danny had the same skills in that he was primarily a mechanic.
He was a machinist.
A machinist,
Yeah.
excuse me, a machinist, where of course precision is absolutely essential.
Yeah, he was a Marine Corps machinist in Vietnam, and then he started working, and when he came back from overseas, he started working as a machinist again, and he loved the precision of it. And even in his lapidary shop, there were lathes and all manner of machinist tools, and he would use them.
Yes, you can see all of those in the interview.
Right there's, and this is all part of his machinist. Danny, you can see on mine, I just tie a knot in it, but not Danny. But it becomes a matter of it's a kind of a labor of love. I mean, because I ended up with about, well, I can tell you, to do this strand, you would have to start with about 350 grams of high quality stone. Of that high quality stone. So 350 grams, we're getting close to a pound. And then from that pound, you're going to get a strand. So economically, it's a bit of a stretch for mass marketing, but for collector marketing, those people who are bead collectors specifically, like I was, I'm good with that. But yeah, it is a lot of waste. These two right here, both of these two strands, I made them at the same time. Danny had sent me, I don't know, a couple pounds of these nuggets to try out my bead making work with turquoise, and he said, "You got to start a Facebook page and do that on Facebook." I didn't know what that meant, so okay, I started a Facebook page, but I made these two strands on my Facebook page. You can look at them step by step.
And for those of you who are interested in learning how to make beads yourself, you can go to Allan's Facebook page and see how these were made step by step.
Step by step, and how they were measured out and calibrated. Because once I had them done, what I decided to do was make one strand that was primarily matrix and one that was primarily not. And so that's how this came to be.
Now, in style of cutting, many who are familiar with Native American beads are very familiar with what is called a hishi cut. But this, I believe, would be called more of a rondelle. Could you comment on that?
It is called a rondelle, and they are, I've never seen he, she made. I've just heard about it, so I can't speak too knowledgeably on that subject.
Well, they're square. They're square.
They're
Square corner.
Yeah, they are square corner, and I think in the bead making process, they probably are done. I believe them to be done several at a time that way. Whereas these, each one is done individually. First, in the case of these nuggets, what these were done was each nugget was lapped with a flat side and then with a parallel flat side. And then you could look inside the nugget and see where's the bead at here. And then decide what size bead it was going to be, find the center of mass, drill a hole at the center of mass, usable mass. And then once you've got that done, now you've got a small piece with a hole drilled in the center of it, and you can put that on a pin vise and spin it against the grinding wheel. And then every bead is shaped that way, first rough, and then in progressively finer grades until I go to a 1800 or 1000 on my expandable drum, and then just buff them for the.
Well, that center mass, I believe, is very important, because otherwise your 85% wastage can become 100% wastage.
Absolutely, yeah. If you don't get that hole in the center, say you're going to make a bead out of this, if you drilled right here, you get your maximum usable mass. But if you screwed up and drilled right there, now that's as big as your bead can be. All that has become waste. So finding that center of usable mass is really important. And again, should somebody be interested, you can see how that, at least how I do that on the Facebook side.
Well, Allan, you're not near as much of a turquoise snob as I am, and you have, fortunately, I'm sure for many viewers, you have branched out now into coral and into some other materials.
Yeah, it's just part of my expansion. I just felt I wanted to do it. I really like the idea of the blending of the colors, the red and the blue in particular. It's a tip of the hat to Tibet, at least my tip of my hat, because I just like that color combination. But this Chinese turquoise just really fits well with this deep red Mediterranean, and I just like the combination of it. This particular bead and this bead actually are made completely, again, online on my website. Those two beads are made, and you can actually see them go from the rock they were to what they are here now and how it got there. But it also documents the waste, because I put it on a scale before I started, and you can see the weight there. And then after I finished, put it back on the scale, and you can confirm how that waste comes to be. But again, I'm going to say I use the term waste, but it is cost to doing business, because that's a beautiful bead.
Well, all your beads are beautiful. You're to be commended on being such a good student. I know Danny's not with us anymore, but
he is smiling.
His spirit lives on in his legacy, which is his beautiful jewelry and, of course, the ongoing bead making of Allan Voshall. So thank you very much, Allan. We really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'm happy to present this stuff and let everybody see what I'm up to and what the Chinese have been up to all these years.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.